The laugh lasted 4 seconds. Not 3, not 5, 4. Long enough for every person in Courtroom 7 to hear it. Long enough for everyone to understand exactly what it meant. And long enough for Judge Harlan Trescott to make the biggest mistake of his career. The laugh rolled across the courtroom like distant thunder. Slow, confident, mocking. The kind of laugh powerful people sometimes use when they believe the outcome has already been decided. The kind of laugh that says, "I know how this ends." At the center of the room sat a 93-year-old man, Clint Eastwood. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even look at the judge. Instead, he sat quietly in the witness chair with both hands resting on the armrests, waiting. Almost as if he had expected the laugh. Almost as if he had known this moment would arrive. The courtroom watched him. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder against the back wall. Teachers, farmers, retired workers, local business owners.
People who had driven for hours just to be there. Everyone was looking at Clint Eastwood, waiting to see how the old man would respond. The judge leaned back slightly, still smiling. Defense attorney Conrad Stellan adjusted his tie, also smiling. Both men appeared pleased with themselves. Neither realized the room was already beginning to turn against them. Because Clint Eastwood had not said anything funny, not a single word. He had simply told the truth. And sometimes the truth makes the wrong people uncomfortable. The jury certainly wasn't laughing. 12 ordinary citizens sat motionless in the jury box. A nurse, a hardware store owner, a retired postal worker, a middle school science teacher. For 3 days they had listened to witnesses, documents, arguments, technical language, legal strategies. Most of it complicated, most of it exhausting. But Clint Eastwood's testimony had been different, simple, direct, human. He had spoken about one farmer, one family, one river,
and 42 acres of land. Nothing more, nothing less. The kind of story that becomes impossible to ignore once you hear it. The judge's laughter faded. Silence followed, heavy silence. The kind that fills a room when something important is about to happen. And then Clint Eastwood slowly reached into the breast pocket of his dark jacket. The movement was so calm that many people barely noticed it at first. No anger, no hurry, no performance. Just a slow, deliberate motion, like a man reaching for something he had carried close to his heart all day. 3 rows back, a retired teacher named Dorothea Cassell leaned forward in her seat. She was 68 years old. She had driven 4 hours from Harlo Falls. She had promised herself she would remain calm. She failed instantly. Her hands began to tremble. Because she knew something the judge didn't. She knew the story behind this case. She knew the people involved. And she knew that Clint Eastwood wasn't the kind of man who carried meaningless things. The old actor pulled something from his pocket. The room froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Then Clint held the object up, and suddenly the judge stopped smiling. The defense attorney stopped smiling. The jury leaned forward. The reporters forgot their notebooks. And for the first time in 3 days, every person in Courtroom 7 was paying complete attention. But before we reveal what Clint Eastwood pulled from his pocket, you need to understand why it mattered. Because that small object wasn't really about Clint. It wasn't about the judge. It wasn't even about the lawsuit. It was about a river, a little girl, a promise, and a farmer who refused to sell. 3 years earlier, Northern California, a town called Harlo Falls. Most Americans had never heard of it, and that was perfectly fine with the people who lived there. Harlo Falls sat between 2 green hills beside a river called the Solace. The town wasn't famous. There were no resorts, no luxury hotels, no tourist attractions, no television crews. Just 314 people, a gas station, a diner, 2 churches, a post office, and a river that seemed older than memory itself. The Solace River ran cold and clear throughout every season. In summer it sparkled beneath the sun. In winter it moved dark and fast beneath gray skies. People in Harlo Falls didn't talk about the river as scenery. They talked about it like family, like something alive, something that deserved respect. And among all the people who loved the Solace River, none loved it more than Emory Pell. Emory had learned to fish in the river when he was 6 years old. His grandfather, Russell Pell, taught him. Not with lectures, not with books, but with patience. The old man would sit beside him for hours, teaching lessons that had very little to do with fish.
Don't force things. Pay attention. Listen more than you speak. Good things take time. The lessons stayed with Emory, even after he grew older, even after he left Harlo Falls, even after life became difficult. When Emory turned 20, he moved away. College, work, responsibilities, the usual things. He studied land management in Sacramento, found a decent job, built a decent life. Then one day, everything changed. His grandfather got sick, badly sick. Emory drove home immediately. The old man was 82, thin, weak, but still sharp, still himself, still carrying that quiet strength Emory had admired his entire life. Russell looked at him from his favorite chair, the same chair he'd sat in for 20 years, the same chair beside the window overlooking the farm. And he said something Emory would never forget. "I am leaving it to you." Emory nodded. "Okay." Russell shook his head. "No." His voice was weak, but his eyes weren't.
"I'm leaving it to you because you're the right one." The room became silent. Outside, the Solace River flowed quietly through the trees. Russell smiled. "You know what it means to stay." 6 weeks later he was gone, and the 42 acres beside the river belonged to Emory Pell. Most people expected him to sell. The land was valuable, very valuable, especially the riverfront portion. Developers would pay a fortune. Investors called constantly. Offers arrived in the mail. Some were absurdly large. But Emory never considered selling, not for a second, because he had made a promise, and promises mattered, especially promises made to dying grandfathers. So he came home, not to get rich, not to develop property, not to build luxury cabins. He came home to farm. He built greenhouses, raised chickens, grew vegetables, hired local workers, worked longer hours than anyone thought reasonable. And slowly, the farm came alive. The first person he hired was Sella Briggs, 61 years old.
Knew more about soil than most professors. Could look at dirt and tell you exactly what it needed. Could predict harvests better than weather reports. Could grow almost anything. She had worked for 3 farms before Emory's. None had treated her like an equal. Emory did, from day one. And she never forgot it. The second person was Tomas Fuerte, 19 years old, quiet, hard-working, determined. His family needed money desperately. His younger sister suffered from severe asthma. Medical bills never stopped. Emory's paycheck helped keep the family afloat. That mattered. A lot. And then there was June. Emory's daughter, 8 years old, bright blue baseball cap, endless curiosity. She named every chicken, talked to every chicken, argued with anyone who confused one chicken for another, and somehow knew every inch of the farm better than anyone else. The farm wasn't just land to June. It was home. It was family. It was her entire world. There was only one problem.
Someone else wanted it, badly. A company called Meridian Land Partners, and they weren't used to hearing the word no. At first they were polite, very polite. They talked about opportunity, economic growth, community investment, partnership, progress. They offered money, a lot of money, enough to make most people say yes immediately. Emory said no. So they increased the offer, again and again and again. Each offer larger than the last. Each one refused. Eventually, the company stopped asking, and that was when the trouble began. Because some people handle rejection poorly, and Meridian Land Partners handled it worse than most. What they did next would take 3 years, destroy lives, threaten livelihoods, push a good man to the edge of bankruptcy, and eventually bring Clint Eastwood into a California courtroom. But nobody in Harlo Falls knew any of that yet. Not Emory, not Sela, not Tomas, and certainly not little June. At that moment, they were still living their ordinary lives, still believing hard work was enough, still believing the truth would protect them. They were about to discover how wrong that belief could be, and the first attack would arrive in the form of a single letter, a letter that seemed harmless until it nearly destroyed everything.
The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Nothing about it looked unusual. White envelope, official seal, County Water Authority. The sort of mail most people open without thinking. The sort of mail that usually contains boring information and harmless paperwork. Emory opened it while standing in the farmhouse kitchen. June sat at the table drawing pictures of chickens. Sela was outside checking irrigation lines. The sun was shining. The river flowed peacefully beyond the trees. Everything felt normal. For another 30 seconds. Then Emory read the first paragraph, and his stomach dropped. The letter claimed a report had been filed. An anonymous report. Possible contamination. Possible environmental violations. Possible damage to the Solace River. Pending investigation, his water license was being suspended immediately. For several seconds, Emory simply stared at the page, reading it again, then a fourth time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something reasonable. They didn't. The Solace River was the farm's lifeline. Without access to river water, nearly everything became harder, more expensive, more complicated. The crops needed water, the greenhouse needed water, the chickens needed water, the farm needed water. And now an anonymous accusation had cut him off from all of it. "Dad?" June's voice broke the silence. Emory looked up. "What is it?" He forced a smile. "Nothing." She narrowed her eyes. Children know when adults lie, especially children who know their parents well. "You made your worried face." Emory almost laughed. "My worried face?" "The one where you stare at paper too long." Despite everything, he smiled. "I'll be okay." June accepted the answer. Mostly. Then went back to drawing. Emory folded the letter, walked outside, and immediately called the county office. A woman answered, polite, professional, completely unhelpful. He asked who filed the complaint. She couldn't tell him. He asked what contamination they were talking about. She couldn't tell him. He asked how long the investigation would take. That answer was worse. "We don't know." Emory stared across the fields. The greenhouse shimmered beneath the morning sun. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet suddenly, everything had changed. When he hung up, Sela Briggs was standing nearby. She had seen enough difficult years to recognize trouble instantly. "What happened?" Emory handed her the letter. She read it. Once, twice, then looked toward the river. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Sela sighed. "This isn't about contamination." "No, it's about the land." "Yes, Sela folded the letter carefully. They've started. Neither needed to say who. Meridian Land Partners. The company that wanted the farm. The company that had stopped asking nicely. The company that wasn't used to hearing no. And now, the real fight had begun. For 6 weeks, Emory hauled water himself.
Every morning before sunrise, every evening after sunset. Truck after truck, tank after tank. The work was exhausting. The cost was worse. Fuel, equipment, repairs, rental fees. Money disappeared quickly, too quickly. By the second week, he had already burned through most of the savings he'd planned to use for greenhouse repairs. By the fourth week, he stopped replacing equipment that needed replacing. By the sixth week, he had started calculating every dollar, quietly, carefully, alone, because he refused to let June worry, and he refused to let Tomas or Sela think the farm might be in danger. Every Friday, he still paid them, on time, exactly as promised, no matter how much it hurt. One evening, Tomas found him repairing a broken irrigation pump. The sun was setting. Orange light stretched across the fields. Emory's hands were covered in grease. Tomas sat beside him. Neither spoke for several minutes. Then Tomas finally asked, "Are we going to be okay?" The question hung in the air.
Emory wanted to tell the truth, the real truth, that he wasn't sure, that every week felt harder, that somebody was trying to destroy everything they'd built. Instead, he gave the answer Tomas needed. Yes. Tomas nodded, because he trusted him completely. And somehow that trust hurt more than the question itself, because Emory knew people depended on him, not just himself. Tomas depended on him. Sela depended on him. June depended on him. If the farm failed, all of them paid the price. 6 weeks later, the investigation ended. The result was exactly what Emory already knew. No contamination, no violations, no environmental damage. Nothing. The complaint had been false, completely false. The water license was restored, and that should have been the end. It wasn't. Because nobody apologized, nobody explained, nobody admitted anything. The county simply restored the license and moved on, leaving Emory to absorb the damage, leaving him to rebuild, leaving him to pay the bills.
Meridian had lost that round. But they weren't finished, not even close. The second attack arrived 4 months later. This time the envelope came from San Francisco, a law firm. Expensive paper, expensive letterhead, expensive threats. The letter claimed that newly discovered land records proved 11 acres of Emory's property didn't actually belong to him. According to the document, those 11 acres belonged to a company connected to Meridian Land Partners. 11 acres, nearly a quarter of the farm, including some of the most valuable riverfront land. Emory read the letter 3 times, then drove directly to Redding, to a lawyer named Patricia Ode. Patricia occupied a small office above a coffee shop. Nothing fancy, no marble floors, no giant conference rooms, no expensive artwork, just shelves full of legal files, and a woman who hated bullies, which made her perfect for this case. Patricia spent 3 months investigating. 3 months. Surveyors, documents, historical records, land deeds, county archives, thousands of pages, and eventually she found the truth. The claim was fake, not mistaken, not confused, fake. Someone had altered records, someone had manufactured evidence, someone had hoped nobody would notice. Patricia noticed, and Meridian quietly withdrew the claim. No apology, again. No explanation, again. No consequences, again. Just 3 more months of damage, 3 more months of stress,
3 more months of legal bills, 3 more months of uncertainty. And still, Emory refused to sell. The company should have understood the message by now. They didn't, because powerful people often mistake kindness for weakness, and Meridian Land Partners was about to make that mistake for the 3rd time. This attack would be different, more personal, more dangerous. It wouldn't arrive through the mail. It wouldn't come from lawyers. It wouldn't come from government agencies. It would come through screens, through rumors, through lies.
And by the time Emory realized what was happening, the damage would already be spreading through Harlo Falls, like poison in a river, a poison somebody had carefully poured there on purpose. And this time, the attack wouldn't just threaten the farm, it would threaten everyone who depended on it, including a little girl in a blue baseball cap who still believed adults usually told the truth. The 3rd attack began on a Monday, quietly, almost invisibly. No letters, no lawyers, no official notices. Nothing Emory could hold in his hands, nothing he could fight directly. And that made it far more dangerous, because some enemies don't attack your property, they attack your reputation. And once that starts, the damage spreads faster than fire. The first sign appeared online, a single anonymous account, no photograph, no real name, no history, no accountability. At first, the post seemed harmless. Small comments, questions, rumors, suggestions. Has anyone else gotten sick after buying eggs from Pell Farm? Just asking questions. A few hours later, another appeared. I heard there was a contamination investigation. Then another. I heard workers there aren't legal. Then another. Be careful where you buy food. Individually, each post looked insignificant. Together, they formed a story. A false story. But most people don't stop to verify stories,
especially when those stories confirm their fears. Within a week, the rumors had spread beyond Harlo Falls. People in neighboring towns started repeating them. Restaurants began asking questions. Customers became nervous. Orders slowed. Then came the phone call. Emory was unloading vegetables when the diner owner from Milton called. The man's voice sounded uncomfortable, embarrassed, almost ashamed. "I'm sorry, Emory." Emory already knew. "What happened?" A long pause. "We're canceling this month's order." Silence. The words landed like a punch. Not because of the money, because of what they meant. The rumors were working. The owner continued, "I don't believe those stories." Another pause. "But customers do." Emory looked across the farm, the greenhouse, the chickens, the fields. Everything looked exactly the same, yet somehow people had stopped trusting it. The owner sighed. "I'm sorry." And for the first time, Emory believed him. Because decent people can still make damaging decisions when they're scared. The call ended. 3 more restaurants canceled within 10 days. Then a grocery cooperative. Then a produce distributor. The farm lost nearly 40% of its income in less than a month. And suddenly, the numbers stopped making sense. Bills continued arriving. Income didn't. Every evening, Emory sat alone at the kitchen table. Calculator, receipts, invoices, numbers, always numbers. Trying to find money that wasn't there. Trying to solve a problem somebody else had created. One night, June walked into the kitchen unexpectedly. She stopped. Her father didn't notice. He was staring at paperwork, completely motionless. She had seen him tired before. She had seen him frustrated before. But she had never seen him look defeated. The sight frightened her. "Dad?" Emory immediately looked up and smiled, too quickly. Children noticed that too. "You okay?" June nodded, then pointed toward the papers. "Are we in trouble?"
The question hit harder than any legal threat, because she already knew the answer. She wouldn't have asked otherwise. Emory forced another smile. "We'll be okay." June stared at him, then quietly asked, "Really?" The room became silent. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwood trees near the river. Inside, a father tried to find the right words. Finally, he nodded. Really. He wasn't sure if it was true, but he needed it to be, for her. The next morning, Sella Briggs arrived before sunrise. She found Emory already working. Again. He had been arriving earlier every day, leaving later every night, trying to make up for losses through effort, as if hard work alone could defeat a corporation. Sella watched him for several minutes, then finally spoke. "You need sleep." "I'm fine." "You look terrible." Emory laughed softly. "Thanks." She didn't smile, because it wasn't a joke. She knew what was happening. Everyone did. Nobody knew how to stop it.
That was the worst part. You can fight something you can see. You can fight a lawsuit. You can fight a false survey. But how do you fight rumors? How do you fight whispers? How do you fight lies spreading through hundreds of screens? Sella had no answer. Neither did Emory. By autumn, the situation became worse, much worse. One afternoon, Tomas asked to speak privately. The moment Emory saw his face, he knew. Bad news. The kind that arrives slowly. The kind people rehearse before speaking. They sat at the old wooden kitchen table, the same table where Russell Pell had once sat. The same table where June did homework. The same table where too many difficult conversations had happened lately. Tomas stared at his hands, then finally spoke. "My sister got worse." Emory listened. "The medication costs more now." A pause. "My mom's picking up extra shifts." Another pause. "But it's still not enough." The room felt smaller. Emory already knew where this conversation was going, and he hated it. Because Tomas wasn't just an employee anymore. He was family. The young man looked up. "I might need another job." The words hung between them, heavy, painful, necessary. Emory nodded slowly, not because he wanted to, because he understood. Tomas wasn't abandoning him. He was trying to save his family. And there is no shame in that. None. The silence lasted a long time. Finally, Tomas said something unexpected. "I'm sorry." Emory shook his head immediately. "No." Then again, "No." Because Tomas had done nothing wrong. The people responsible weren't sitting at that table. They were sitting in expensive offices, wearing expensive suits, making decisions that damaged lives they'd never bothered to understand. That night, Emory couldn't sleep. Again. Around midnight, he drove into town, past the diner, past the church, past the gas station, then beyond Harlo Falls, toward land Meridian already owned. The former Kowalski property. The former Marsh property.
Land that once belonged to families, now surrounded by fencing, bright signs, development plans, promises of luxury cabins, promises of profit, promises written by people who would never live there. Emory sat in his truck for nearly an hour, watching, thinking, remembering, and finally realizing something. If he kept defending himself, he would lose, because Meridian wanted him exhausted, wanted him distracted, wanted him reacting, wanted him surviving, not fighting. And suddenly, Emory understood. The only way forward wasn't defense, it was attack. For 3 years, he'd been absorbing punches. For 3 years, he'd been rebuilding damage. For 3 years, he'd been hoping things would improve. They hadn't, and they wouldn't. Not until somebody stopped Meridian, for the first time, permanently. The next morning, he called Patricia Ode. The lawyer answered immediately, almost as if she'd been expecting it. Patricia, a pause. Then Emory said 4 words. 4 words that changed everything. I want to sue. Silence. Then Patricia smiled. He couldn't see it, but he heard it, because she'd been waiting months for that sentence. Maybe longer. Good. Another pause. Because I've been building something. Emory frowned. What do you mean? Patricia looked toward a stack of files beside her desk, files she'd been collecting quietly for months. Pieces of a puzzle. Pieces that finally fit together. And then she said something that would change the entire story. Something that would eventually bring a 93-year-old man into Courtroom 7. Something that would make Meridian land partners wish they'd chosen a different farm, a different town, a different target. Because Patricia had already contacted someone who hated bullies, someone who believed ordinary people deserved protection, someone whose name would soon appear in newspapers across California. Emory asked quietly, "Who?" Patricia smiled and answered, "Clint Eastwood." For a moment, Emory thought he had heard wrong. The farmhouse kitchen became completely silent. Even the ticking clock above the refrigerator seemed to stop. "Clint Eastwood?" Patricia laughed softly. That's usually the reaction. Emory sat back in his chair, trying to process what she had just said. Not because he didn't know who Clint Eastwood was. Everybody knew who Clint Eastwood was. Movies, awards, directing, Hollywood. People like Clint Eastwood didn't usually become involved in fights over small farms. Especially not farms nobody outside Northern California had ever heard of. Yet Patricia sounded completely serious. He knows about the case. How? A mutual connection. Patricia glanced toward the file on her desk. Someone who knows someone who knows someone. A pause. Small towns have a funny way of reaching places you'd never expect. For the first time in months, Emory smiled. Only slightly, but it was enough. When the call ended, he sat alone for several minutes, thinking.
Outside, the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the fields. The greenhouse reflected gold light. The chickens wandered freely near the fence. Everything looked peaceful. Yet beneath that peace, a war was happening. A war Meridian land partners thought they were winning. A war they had no idea was about to change. 3 weeks later, a black pickup truck rolled into Harlo Falls. No police escort, no reporters, no announcement. Just one vehicle. The driver parked outside Marby's diner, stepped out, and instantly became the most recognizable person in town. Clint Eastwood. 93 years old, wearing a dark jacket, old boots, blue jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, nothing designed to attract attention. Yet attention found him immediately. Because some people carry presence the way others carry shadows, naturally, without effort. Within 15 minutes, the entire town knew. Pete at the gas station knew. The waitress at Marby's knew. The pastor knew. The grocery store owner knew. Half the town suddenly developed reasons to walk past the diner window. Some carried coffee, some carried newspapers. One man walked a dog he didn't even own. Anything for a glimpse. Inside the diner, Clint Eastwood sat quietly by the window, drinking coffee, watching the street, listening. The way people who pay attention listen. Not waiting to speak, waiting to understand. 20 minutes later, Emory arrived. He walked through the door, saw Clint immediately, and froze. Not because he was starstruck, because suddenly this fight felt real. bigger, more serious, more dangerous. Clint looked up. Their eyes met. Then Clint motioned toward the empty seat across from him. "Sit down." Emory sat. For a few moments, neither spoke. The waitress brought fresh coffee, set it down, left. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt deliberate, like Clint was measuring something, not judging, measuring. Finally, Clint looked out the window, toward the distant hills, toward the river beyond them. Then he spoke. "Nice river." Emory nodded. "Yes, sir." Clint wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "You aren't selling." Not a question, a statement. Emory shook his head. "No." Clint studied him. Long enough to make most people uncomfortable, yet somehow Emory wasn't uncomfortable, because the old man wasn't looking for weakness. He was looking for conviction. And apparently he found it. Slowly, Clint nodded. "Good." Another pause. Then he asked something unexpected. "Why?" Emory frowned. "Why what?" "Why stay?" The question caught him off guard, because nobody had asked that before. Developers asked about money. Lawyers asked about contracts. Reporters asked about lawsuits. Nobody asked why. Emory looked toward the window, toward the fields, toward the place he had spent years protecting, then answered honestly. "My grandfather." Clint remained silent, listening. "He spent his whole life there." A pause. "He trusted me with it." Another pause. "I made a promise." The diner became very quiet. Even the sounds from nearby tables seemed distant. Clint nodded slowly, as if that answer told him everything he needed to know. And perhaps it did. Because people reveal themselves in moments like that, not through speeches, not through credentials, through values, through the things they refuse to abandon. Finally, Clint spoke. "My father used to say something." Emory waited. He said, "Land remembers." The words lingered. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Then Clint smiled faintly. "Smart man." The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. They talked about the farm, the lawsuits, the river, the greenhouse, the chickens, even June. Especially June. Because when Clint learned there was an 8-year-old girl involved, his expression changed. Slightly, but noticeably. Children mattered to him. Always had. Before leaving, Clint asked one final question. "Where is she?" "School." Clint nodded. "Good." Then he stood. The entire diner seemed to notice simultaneously. Conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee cups froze. Because people sensed something important had just happened. And they were right. Clint extended his hand. Emory shook it. The old man's grip was firm, stronger than expected. Then Clint said 7 words. 7 words that would eventually terrify Meridian land partners. 7 words that Emory never forgot. "Then let's make sure you keep it." And for the first time in 3 years, Emory felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Real hope. Not optimism, not wishful thinking. Hope. The kind that arrives when someone powerful chooses to stand beside you instead of above you. That evening, June came home from school, dropped her backpack, removed her blue baseball cap, and immediately noticed something different. Her father was smiling, not pretending, actually smiling. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "What happened?" Emory laughed.
"You won't believe me. Try me." He sat down, then told her. June listened carefully, completely serious. When he finished, she remained silent for several seconds, thinking, processing, evaluating. Finally, she asked, "Is he tall?" Emory blinked. "What?" "Clint Eastwood." A pause. "Is he tall?" Emory laughed harder than he had laughed in months. "I think so." June nodded, satisfied. "Okay." Then she stood, put her cap back on, and walked outside to feed the chickens, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something extraordinary had happened, because while June fed chickens, and while the Solace River flowed quietly through the valley, and while Harlo Falls settled into another peaceful evening, Clint Eastwood was already moving, calling people, reviewing records, reading reports, following a trail of evidence that would soon expose everything Meridian Land Partners had tried to hide. And the deeper he looked, the uglier the truth became.
Because this wasn't just about one farm anymore. It wasn't even about 42 acres. It was about a pattern of intimidation, a pattern of fraud, a pattern that stretched far beyond Harlo Falls. And once Clint saw the full picture, he made a decision. A decision that would eventually bring him into Courtroom 7. A decision that would put him face to face with Judge Harlan Trescott. A decision that would lead to the moment when an entire courtroom fell silent, and to the small object hidden inside his jacket pocket. The object nobody saw coming. The object that would change everything. 3 months later, Courtroom 7 was full. Every seat occupied, every standing space taken, every hallway crowded. People had come from Harlo Falls, from neighboring towns, from Sacramento, from San Francisco, even from counties that had nothing to do with the case. They all wanted to witness the same thing, the final day, the day everything would be decided. For 3 years, Meridian Land Partners had pushed, threatened, manipulated, pressured, and now they finally sat across from the people they had underestimated. At the plaintiff's table sat Emory Pell, dark blue suit, hands folded calmly. The same suit he'd worn to Clara's funeral. Beside him sat Patricia Ode, focused, prepared, unshakable. A few seats behind them sat Sella Briggs, Tomas Fuerte, Dorothea Cassell, and dozens of people from Harlo Falls, people who understood what was truly on trial. Not just land, not just money. The idea that ordinary people mattered. Across the room sat Meridian Land Partners, 4 attorneys,
3 executives, thousands of dollars worth of suits, and confidence. Lots of confidence. Especially Conrad Stellan, the lead defense attorney. For 3 days he had acted as though the outcome was already decided, as though this trial were merely a formality, as though Emory Pell had already lost. Then Clint Eastwood took the stand, and everything changed. For nearly an hour he testified, calmly, clearly. No speeches, no drama, just facts. One fact after another. The jury listened carefully. The gallery listened carefully. Even the judge listened carefully. At first. Then Conrad Stellan stood for cross-examination. The attorney smiled politely, too politely, the way people smile when they think they've already won. He praised Clint's career, praised his films, praised his achievements. Then came the attack, subtle at first. Did Mr. Eastwood have legal training? No. Did Mr. Eastwood have investigative credentials? No.
Did Mr. Eastwood believe fame might have exaggerated the importance of his opinions? The courtroom became quieter. Everyone could see what Stellan was doing. He wasn't attacking the evidence, he was attacking the witness. Trying to turn Clint Eastwood into a celebrity distraction. Trying to make the jury forget the facts. Trying to make this case about Hollywood instead of truth. Then came the question that crossed the line. Mr. Eastwood. A smile. Wouldn't you agree that you're essentially here as a performer? The room went silent. Clint looked at him. Not angry, not offended, just patient. Then answered, "No." The single word landed harder than a paragraph. The gallery shifted. Stellan pressed forward. "Then why are you here?" Clint answered immediately, "Because someone needed help." The room became still. But Stellan wasn't finished, and then the judge laughed. The same laugh that would later appear in newspaper headlines. A low laugh, a dismissive laugh.
A dangerous laugh. The laugh of a man who thought the ending had already been written. It lasted 4 seconds, 4 very long seconds. Nobody else laughed. Not the jury, not the gallery, not even the defense attorneys. Only the judge. Then silence returned, and Clint Eastwood slowly reached into his jacket pocket. The movement seemed ordinary, almost boring, yet every person in the room watched, because something about it felt important, deliberate, intentional, as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment. His hand emerged, holding something small, something worn, something completely unexpected. Not a document, not a photograph, not evidence prepared by lawyers, not anything anyone expected. It was an old baseball cap, blue, faded, child-sized. The entire courtroom froze. Nobody understood, at first. Then Clint held it up, carefully, respectfully, like something precious. And suddenly Emory looked down, because he recognized it immediately. So did Sella. So did Tomas.
And 3 rows back, Dorothea Cassell covered her mouth. It was June's cap, the blue cap, the one she wore every day, the one she'd worn while feeding chickens, the one she'd worn planting vegetables, the one she'd worn when she learned Clint Eastwood was helping them, the one she'd accidentally left behind during one of Clint's visits to the farm months earlier. The room remained silent. Nobody understood yet, except the people from Harlo Falls. Clint looked at the jury, then spoke. "This cap belongs to an 8-year-old girl." Silence. "She doesn't care about land values." A pause. "She doesn't care about development plans." Another pause. "She doesn't care about corporate profits." The jury leaned forward. Clint continued. "She cares about chickens." Several people smiled, despite themselves. "She cares about her father." The smiles disappeared. "She cares about her home." The room became perfectly still. Then Clint looked directly at the jury and said the sentence nobody forgot. "Everything in this courtroom is being argued as numbers." A pause. "But this," he lifted the cap slightly, "this is who those numbers belong to." No one moved. No one spoke. Even Judge Harlan Trescott sat frozen. For the first time since the trial began, the case became real. Not property, people. Not acreage, family. Not profit, home. The jury understood instantly. So did everyone else, because the cap represented something impossible to fake. A future, a child, a life connected to the land, a reason to fight. And suddenly every survey, every document, every legal argument, every corporate excuse seemed smaller, much smaller. The judge's smile vanished completely. Conrad Stellan never asked another question, not one. The jury received the case the following morning. They deliberated less than 3 hours. 3. When they returned, the foreperson stood. The room held its breath. The verdict was unanimous. Meridian Land Partners liable.
Fraud, interference, damages, punitive damages, legal costs, everything. The company lost. Completely. The courtroom erupted. Not wildly, not dramatically, just relief. Pure relief. Sella cried. Tomas cried. Dorothea cried. Even Patricia Ode looked emotional. Emory sat silently, trying to absorb it, trying to believe it. After 3 years of fighting, it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed forward. Microphones, cameras, questions. Everyone wanted Clint Eastwood's reaction. He stopped briefly, looked toward the courthouse, then toward Emory, and smiled. What happened here wasn't about me. A pause. It was about people refusing to quit. Then he walked away. Just like that. No victory speech, no spotlight, no celebration. Because some people don't help others to be noticed. They help because it's the right thing to do. Months later, the fences came down. The development project died. The Solace River remained untouched. The greenhouse survived.
Tomas kept his job. Sella kept working the soil she loved, and June kept wearing blue baseball caps, though never that one. Clint returned it, framed, with a note. A short note, just 7 words. Some things are worth standing still for. The cap still hangs inside the Pell farmhouse today, near a window, where morning sunlight touches it first. And whenever visitors ask why it's there, June tells them the story of a river, a promise, a farm, a courtroom, and a 93-year-old man who proved that sometimes the smallest thing in a room can carry the biggest truth.